Hey guys, today we're making the Nerina top, which is a drop shoulder sailor top with a boxy, comfortable fit. It comes with a one-piece sailor collar that I think is so cute and nostalgic. This pattern has two views. View A features pleated long sleeves with finished cuffs that you can wear folded up, and View B offers classic short sleeves. If you have been intimidated by sailor collars before, this is your moment. I've spent quite some time on perfecting a method that gives you that polished, professional finish without the frustration, and many of my pattern testers told me that this top came together so much faster than they had expected, and some beginner sewists completed it as their first sailor collar project ever. So if they can do it, you can too. If you haven't watched my pattern introduction video yet, I'll leave a link below so you can check it out after this video. Let's dive in and start sewing this top together. First, let's start cutting out all your pattern pieces. I fully converted to using a projector, so I just project the pattern onto my cutting table and use a rotary cutter with a cutting mat underneath. When you are cutting, make sure to mark all your notches. I'm using a water-soluble pen here. I also like to mark the center line, which isn't required, but will definitely help with alignment later. And for the front bodice and collar pieces, don't forget to mark those alignment dots. They're going to be crucial for getting the perfect collar placement. By the way, all the seam allowances in this pattern are 1/2 inch, which is 1.2 centimeter, and I'll put the centimeter measurements on the screen whenever I mention a measurement. Now let's get started with the start of the show, our sailor collar. First, we'll assemble the collar pieces by aligning those dots we just marked, plus the center markings with the right sides together. Even though we're sewing around the outer edge, I like to pin the inside first. It just makes it easier to align everything and keeps in place while we're sewing. Pin around the outer edge and sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. This next step is optional, but I really recommend for professional finish. We're going to grade the seam allowance. I'll trim one seam allowance to about 1/4 inch and the other one to 3/8 inch. This creates a nice graduated edge that won't be bulky when we turn it right side out. Let's clip some small V-shaped notches along the curved edges. This helps the seam allowance to sit nicely when flip the collar. For the back corners, I'm also trimming the square corners at an angle so everything lies flat. And I'm just going to give it a good press to grease up those edges. See how much neater that looks. Now let's base the neckline at 3/8 inch from the inside raw edge. I'm using a 4mm stitch length. This keeps our collar layers together and makes it easier to attach later. While we are in prep mode, let's get the facing ready. Apply interfacing to the wrong side of both the front and back neckline facing pieces. I recommend using light to medium weight interfacing, depends on the weight of your main fabric. Pin the two neckline facing pieces right sides together and sew the shoulder seam. You can see that I'm hand pressing the seams open. Since the facing will be hidden inside the garment, facing the bodice, I don't think it's mandatory to finish those seams, but feel free to do so if you prefer. Now let's finish the outer edge of the facing. You can do so with a serger or a zigzag stitch. I like to start at one of the V corner and work all the way around to the other corner. And then pull out any loose thread and tie it into a secure knot to keep everything tidy. Moving on to the bodice. First, let's prepare it. There are two optional steps that make sewing easier and give you a cleaner, more durable neckline. First, stay stitch the front and back neckline about 1/4 inch from the raw edges with a regular stitch length to prevent the neckline from stretching during construction. Second, for actual reinforcement, especially with light or shifty fabrics, add a 1-inch square of fusible lightweight interfacing at the V point. This helps stabilize the neckline. I'm skipping both here since I'm working with a very stable mid-weight fabric and I have sewn this pattern so many times, but I want to call it out in this step. So if it's your first time or you're using a delicate fabric, I highly recommend doing both. Now it's time to work on the bodice. We'll start by sewing the shoulder seams. Pin the front and back bodice pieces right sides together at the shoulder and stitch with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. That's the standard for the entire pattern except for hemming. Finish the seam with a serger or zigzag stitch and press the seam allowance towards the back. And since this is a curved seam, I'll press it using a tailor's ham to maintain its nice shoulder curve. Now we're going to attach our collar to the bodice. First, position both pieces right side up, basically how you would wear them, and carefully align those dots we have marked earlier. This is the most important step for getting a beautiful professional looking collar. Also align the notch on the collar with the shoulder seam of the bodice and also pin the center back. Now just pin all the way around the neckline. Since most of the neckline is cut on bias, if things don't fit perfectly, don't panic. You can stretch it slightly to make it work. Start sewing at one of the collar dots and go all the way around, making sure to backstitch like you usually do for a seam. When you get close to the other collar corner, pause and double check that your dots are still aligned. If they are not perfect, you can stretch the fabric slightly to make them meet. Now here's the key technique. Trim off the excess collar that extends past the dot, but leave about 1 mm behind the stitching. Put the other collar pieces in place and sew to the dot and backstitch. This way, the collar pieces don't get in each other's way as you sew. And you trim off the excess collar again, just like the other side. Here is what it looks like. Now let's attach the facing to give our neckline a beautiful finish. Start by aligning the dot of the V-neck. You can use a pin to pierce through both layers for the perfect alignment, and pin all the way around. We'll stitch the facing in place right on top of the existing stitching line from when we attach the collar. This ensures that when we flip everything to the inside, the seam line will be perfectly hidden. Feel free to go slower here and even reduce the stitch length around the V-neck for better control. Here I'm doing 2 mm or 1.8 mm stitch length and return to 2.5 mm later once I pass the V-neck. Before we can turn everything right side out, we'll need to clip to the V-point. Leave just about a couple of threads behind your stitch line. We want to get close but not cut through our stitching. You do this for both the front bodice and the front facing. Let's check our collar placement by temporarily folding the facing inside. Generally, if the alignment is close, it'll be forgiving when worn, but if it's way off, you can always unpick and resew that section. Now let's grade the seam allowances since we have quite a few layers here. I'll trim them to different widths, about 1/4 inch to 3/8 inch. Then clip the entire neckline about 1 inch apart so everything will lay flat when turned. Let's understitch the facing to prevent it from rolling to the outside. I'll press everything first with my iron and then stitch the seam allowance to the facing, starting and stopping about a quarter inch from each corner since we can't get to that V point easily with our sewing machine. And now flip the facing to the inside and press everything beautifully flat. To keep our facing in place, we'll top stitch around the neckline. For an invisible finish, which I prefer, start and stop about half an inch to 1 inch away from the V point. The collar will cover the stitching line so it's completely hidden. I find half an inch top stitching to be at the sweet spot, but feel free to go wider. If you prefer a visible decorative look, you can top stitch the entire neckline at whatever width you like. It's really up to your personal style. Now let's move on to the sleeves. Make sure you have marked all your sleeve notches. Remember, the sleeves are asymmetrical. The front has a single notch and the back has a double notch, plus there's a dot at the center that aligns with the shoulder seam. If you're making view A with a long sleeve, you need to create the box pleat first. Follow the pattern markings and bring the pleat lines to the center and press to secure. For the cuffs, fold them in half lengthwise with the right size out, and then fold one edge in about half an inch. This creates a crease that we'll use later when finishing the cuffs. Next, sew the cuff to the sleeve with the right sides together, and then press the seam allowance towards the cuff. Now let's attach the sleeve to the bodice. I'm using the flat construction method here because I find this way to be way easier than sewing two tubes together. So you align all your notches, the single notches to the front and double notches to the back, and the center dot to the shoulder seam. Here's the key, these pieces have different curves, but we're going to make them work by aligning them at the half-inch seam allowance line. I find it much easier to work with the curve by actually curving the fabric and pin them together, rather than trying to keep everything flat on the table and then pin. So just use that third dimension. You might see a little triangle of the seam allowance peeking out, and that's totally normal as long as the stitch lines are lining up. Once everything is pinned, sew with a half-inch seam allowance. I like to keep the sleeve side facing up as I sew. Then finish the seam with a serger and press the seam allowance towards the sleeve. That's the natural direction the sleeve wants to go with gravity. Now we'll close up the side seams, and after this, your top will really start taking shape. Turn the garment inside out and start pinning at the underarm. I like to start at armhole seam and then pin all the way down to the sleeve cuffs, and then down to the hem. If you're making a long sleeve version, make sure to unfold the cuffs. Next, sew everything in one continuous seam with a 1/2-inch seam allowance, then finish with your serger or zigzag stitch. From the inside, fold the cuff up using the crease we created earlier. The inside folded edge should line up with the stitch line where we attach the cuff to the sleeve. You might need to adjust it slightly to get it perfect. If you're using a medium or heavier weight fabric, you may notice some bulk at the cuff where it meets the sleeve. To reduce this, snip into the seam allowance, leaving a few threads before the stitching, then press the seam allowance in the opposite directions. When you fold the cuff again, the layers will sit more evenly. Pin in place, and then this part can be a little tricky depends on your cuff size. We'll top stitch from the inside. I need to turn my sleeve right side out to do this since my cuff is smaller than my sewing machine arm, so I couldn't put it on the arm. I turned my sleeve to the right side and then stitch to the inside of the cuff to secure it. Take your time with this step. When you are done, you'll have a beautiful finish on both the inside and outside with the top stitching line at the same distance to the cuff. Perfect for rolling up the cuffs, which is how the top is designed to be worn. If you're making the short sleeve version, you hem the sleeves by folding up a 1/4 inch and then a 1/2 inch. Press everything nice and flat and then top stitch to finish it. For the final step, we'll hem the bodice. Fold up 1/2 inch and then another inch, press and pin in place. Before you sew, try the top on to check the length. If it's too long, you can always make a bigger hem or trim some fabric off. One thing to note here, the front piece is slightly curved to accommodate the bust curve, so you might need to ease the fabric slightly as you hem, just like what you would do for an A-line skirt. Sew it all the way around and you are done. And here is our finished Nerina sailor top. For the long sleeve version, remember to fold those cuffs up. I think they look adorable when sitting just above the wrist, and they soften up the pleats a little bit. Thank you so much for sewing along with me today. I hope you love your new Nerina top as much as I do. And if you make one, I love to see it. So make sure to tag me on social media or share it in the comments below. I'll see you next time.